We're kind of hardwired to think what can go wrong and not necessarily what can go right or be learned or be gained from an experience. And I think we can use this to our advantage because a lot of the time risks are not that scary once we take them. And if we think before we do it, okay, what is actually the worst case? A lot of the time we realize it's not that bad. And the possibilities that we might gain from it are actually really great.
That is today's guest, Alex Hennock. He is an Australian who's been prioritizing travel for the last decade. So at 28 years old, he's already traveled to half the countries in the world, mostly overland. He is also a fellow Zero to Travel community member. He's an avid listener of this show. And when he dropped me an email sharing his story and the fact that he was about halfway through his journey to cycle the length of Africa, he was raising money for a charity called Pure Water for Africa, I knew I had to get him on the show to share a bit about his adventures, along with a thoughtful list he put together for you today. 9 ways travel will profoundly change you. His on-the-ground experience, of course, he shares cycling through Africa. He's got plenty of stories from the road to bring to you today.
We were in the middle of Botswana, like hundreds of kilometers from really anyone. You'd see probably 4 or 5 cars a day. So we didn't really have that luxury. And we've managed to go as far to the left as we can, but the big bull elephant had his back to us. So I think we kind of spooked him as we got close, and he must have made the call to the other elephants for them to turn and run, and he's turned at us and sort of come right up to the edge of the road. And yeah, that was a pretty scary encounter.
And loads more, as you'll hear today. This conversation certainly left me feeling energized and inspired. And one big reason for that is that it was a great reminder that grand adventures like cycling the entire length of Africa, it's not reserved for, quote, special travelers. These types of trips really are for anyone with the desire, the drive, and the willingness to prioritize travel. So don't be surprised if you walk away from this episode with an idea for your own comfort zone shattering adventure and perhaps a totally different life trajectory. Who knows? I mean, maybe that's too big of an intention, but anything's possible when you dive into a conversation like this. And on top of all that today, you're going to hear part 2 of our special mini-series featuring the 5 best road trips in the USA. Last time, we headed north. Which direction are we headed today? You'll have to tune in to find out. All of that and much more happening right now. It's a great one. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friends. Thank you for being here, allowing me the privilege of bringing you a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And I encourage you to get in touch. Alex did that. He dropped me an email, our guest today. He said, quote, "I've been listening to Zero to Travel for as long as I can remember. It has spent some serious time in my ears across all continents of the world. Most recently, it's kept me company on my journey to cycle the length of Africa." And he goes on to say it would be a dream come true to be part of the show in any way I can, end quote. And here he is. I wanted to bring him on because he wanted to give back to the community. That's what this community is all about. Sharing stories, sharing perspectives, sharing ideas, and having this exchange, this beautiful exchange here. This is not a one-way conversation. So please, I encourage you to get in touch. If you haven't done so, you can always leave me a voicemail, drop me a line, jason@zerototravel.com. And you can sign up for our newsletter. It's free over at zerototravel.com/newsletter. By the way, you can find Alex over at routetotravel.com. He's also starting to run some small group tours over at farcorners.tours. We'll link up to all that, including his YouTube, his Instagram, if you want to follow him, and his fundraiser for Pure Water for Africa that was tied in with this trip you're going to hear about today. Lastly, stick around after the conversation for a few reasons. Number one, you're going to hear that second part of our 5 best road trips in the U.S. Each week, you're going to discover a new unforgettable trip in a region of the USA. You'll hear where we're headed today. I'm going to leave you with a pretty funny quote that relates to this episode. a big takeaway, including a special community shout out, which may apply to you, especially coming out of this particular episode. And lastly, I did want to mention, this has never happened in 12 years of doing this podcast, almost 12 years. I had some audio issues. Hopefully they're smoothed out enough and you won't notice, but I just want to mention apologies for that. But I didn't want to hold back this episode just because I had a few audio issues on my end. So we're putting it out there because there's a ton of value in this one. So please enjoy my conversation with Alex, and I'll see you on the other side of that. Thanks for listening. Alex Hennock, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
Wow, it feels amazing to hear that. Thank you, Jason, and thank you so much for bringing us the good content for all these years. And I'm sure I speak for many people when I say that, and all the influence you've had on us in travel. So great to be here.
Thank you, good sir. That's very kind to hear. Yeah, we gave you a shout out some episodes ago, and I said, we got to get this guy on the pod. And here he is, cycling through Africa, which is not a small adventure. How come you're not doing the, Aussie backpacker Southeast Asia thing, or you did that already? Like, I mean, there's a lot of other things you could do besides subjecting yourself to a 3,400 kilometer journey through an entire continent.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. I haven't thought about it that way, but I guess you could say I have done all that before and sort of worked my way up to a point where this, oddly enough, feels like a natural progression. So it's we'll get into that, but yeah, it just became a sort of dream to go from the top to the bottom, and I've had a pretty full life of travel and a pretty full life of adventure sports and endurance stuff, and I thought, hey, it's a pretty nice way to stick them together. And yeah, so from bottom to top, it's about 10,000 Ks all up. So today we're ticking over 4,000 Ks into the journey.
Yeah. Whereabouts are you right now?
I am in stormy Kigoma, Tanzania. It'll be the last day in Tanzania, heading up into Burundi. So sipping on the last bit of Kilimanjaro tea as we speak.
Nice. Isn't it awesome to say, and I'm just bringing up the age thing because you put it in your bio, that at 28 years old, Alex, you can say, I've had a pretty full life of travel. What a gift, man.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a priority for the last 10 years, I guess. It's ever since I left school, it was just like I saw the value that it provided and the educational opportunities, and I was lucky enough to be able to do it at the same time as studying full-time, getting my master's degree and working my way up and having a full-time job, until the point where I've realized recently that, this is something I want to be doing more full-time. So I'm kind of in that transitional phase at the moment of going location independent, as you love to promote.
Yeah, trying to figure it out. That's great, man. Sometimes the real world's calling, or you feel like, oh, should I not be doing this anymore? Totally different experiences, but I remember being around your age and thinking I should probably be, friends are starting to settle down and, some of that kind of stuff. And then you're just like, but I want to keep traveling. So, I mean, it's good that you just follow your heart and ignore kind of the societal norms and the pressures, which I think, like, to be fair now, I think maybe we're just in a bubble here in the Zero to Travel podcast, but I feel like people are a lot more free thinking in terms of like, how they might want to live their lives, and they don't have to conform to the thing that society or their parents want them to do. Well, what about your parent? Was that like a thing that was?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because it was definitely a part of my life growing up. We went on some family trips, nothing too crazy or adventurous, but my parents have definitely always been so supportive. They've been so great at allowing me to work out these options and directions on my own through my life. And I've really been always so appreciative of that. And, it gets to a point now where you're visiting some sort of quote unquote more dangerous countries that obviously they start to worry. But interestingly enough, my mum and my auntie are here at the moment in Kigoma. They've come to visit, and they've never been to Africa before. And they're now seeing the beauties of what I get to experience on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is one of the first trips where my mum has just really opened up and said, you know what, this I see why you do this stuff, and I see the joy that it brings, and I see the joy that it brings to herself as well. She's been exposed to some things she never thought she would, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I have been able to see, is that growth in people that I care about, and something that, you know, I've worked so hard to get to a point that I can do with my day-to-day life, and to see that reflected in the people I care about is pretty special.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Like, you're getting to share that with your family in that way, you know, because the relationship with your parents, it changes and evolves, right? Like, you get to teenage years and then you kind of realize, oh, they're just humans. And then you're trying to figure out like what kind of humans they are, and, you know, sort through some of the stuff. And then as you get a bit older, you start to develop like a different kind of relationship with them. And then they start to learn different things and stretch their comfort zone because of things that you're doing, which is, you know, what they did for you your whole life, to kind of like try to, you know, give you space to be challenged and to kind of support you. And now you get that in reverse. It's pretty special.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like a passing of the mantle, I could say, that it's because my dad is also coming to meet me at the end of this trip, and I feel like he's already feeling like it's going to be the same thing there that I've experienced with my mom. And yeah, they both had never been to Africa, so for something that they never thought they would do, to be able to even just influence them enough to come here and get that completely different perspective shift on life is something that, you know, if someone's gone their whole life up until the later years, and then to be able to have something so novel and refreshing and new and eye-opening is a powerful experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard not to be inspired by what you're doing, man. I mean, cycling through the continent, you know, I know you're doing it for raising money for Pure Water for Africa, which we'll talk about all that. But why did you want to come on the show? I mean, you said, you know, you were a listener, you reached out. I know why I wanted to have you on, to share your story and to talk about some of your adventures and travel advice. You know, I think that's the spirit of this community. Like, we want to share stories and give back in some way and kind of keep those good vibes circulating. And I'm just wondering, for you, what is your kind of intention with this episode to let people know?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the fact that, as I said to you, I've been listening for, it feels like longer than the podcast has been around. So it must have been pretty early days. And I've always listened to it with such like a fascination with the people that come on, and thinking, wow, like, they're doing these incredible things. Like, I wonder if ever there would be a time where, you know, I would be at a stage where there'd be something that I feel would be worthwhile sharing. And I think a lot of the travel that I'd done up until this point, I mean, as I said, I travel quite frequently, but it was always kind of fit as much in as you can, try and see the sights and, you know, have those more early 20s, like late teen experiences and stuff, and maybe not quite as deep. But then, you know, as I've gone on more recent trips and overlanding through all 7 of the stands in Central Asia, and then having a big trip to a festival in Papua New Guinea, and then having this experience through Africa, I think it's really changed my approach to travel and the way that I want to interact with the communities that I go into, and, you know, slowing down that bit. And I guess that comes with age, and it comes with more experience and wanting to integrate more with the communities that you enter, because I think previously it was probably a bit more superficial, and I don't regret the travel decisions that I made, because it's led me to where I am, and it's allowed me to be more sort of introspective about the way I want to travel now. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting shift, and that's something I feel that now I can bring to Zero to Travel and share back with the community that I've loved to listen to over the years. And yeah, I've kind of come up with 10 little pieces of advice that I think that I've got from mistakes and experiences, and little anecdotes to sort of solidify those. So as many as you want to hear, I'll happily provide.
Yeah, that's great, man. Thanks for putting that together. I think that's going to be awesome. I mean, we should just start going through it. I think just to echo kind of what you said, we're not labeling your previous travels superficial in a way, but I mean, you had all these experiences, and you feel like you needed that as a basis to kind of get to where you are right now. You can't ever say this is something everybody needs to go through, but I do feel like when you first start traveling, there is a sort of inclination for people to want to just, you know, see as much as they can, and you want to soak it all in, and it's understandable. You know, you move at a different pace, but then the longer you travel, perhaps the pace changes. And granted, like, there are going to be exceptions to this. Some people will come out of the gates and, you know, their first thing might be a crazy adventure like you're doing. We're calling it crazy, but we're trying to normalize it here. I mean, is that part of the goal here? Like, yeah, this is like you're saying, this is something that you thought, would I ever be one of those people doing it? And now you're out doing it. Do you want to just tell people, just to kind of summarize the trip you're on now, so people kind of understand where you're at on your trip in life, and then we can use that as some context to go through, some of these points that you brought.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that was probably a much better way of putting it. Not superficial, but just more scratching the surface and wanting to go a little deeper now that developed a bit more in my travel approach and style. I think that's a much
got
nicer
confidence,
way. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And as I said, I mean, obviously I've up until this point it's been quite fast travel to have visited almost half of the countries of the world by 28. But I think the second half, if I do end up visiting them all, will be in a lot slower, more meaningful manner, I think.
Well, has that changed? Has the sort of the idea of trying to get to every country is that like, oh, whatever, if it happens, I'd rather just go deeper? Or
I think the reasoning behind it has changed. It's no longer, and it's one of the points I've got on the list is.
Should we start the list then? Why don't you start with that one then?
Sure. So I think that one is mainly around, and it's something that really this trip has taught me a lot. So this trip I've coined Cycle Africa for obvious reasons, and it came about because of wanting to travel from Cape Town to Cairo overland, and realizing that bike travel, I mean, I've always been pretty into sports at home, doing a lot of long distance Ironman triathlon and the like, and I've loved cycling, and I just had never taken it to the point of doing it as a way of travel. And I felt like I'd done a fair bit of overland travel in different ways, and I thought, why not give bike travel a go? And it's just, for me at least, such a lovely pace of travel. You get to interact with everything, for better or worse. You're able to stop in places that you want, and you can go off the beaten path. And so I thought, why not travel to pretty much probably my favorite continent and do a big sort of journey from A to B and see everything in between. And so the journey takes about 10,000 kilometers, about 6,000 miles or so, from Cape Town through 14 or so countries. We're going through Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, up tomorrow through Burundi into Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somaliland, and Djibouti, because at the moment Sudan is closed for obviously very sad reasons, and it's not a safe place to be traveling through to get to Egypt. So being flexible on that route is obviously a huge aspect of being out here. So ending up in Djibouti on the Red Sea. So come mid-January 2025, should be riding my bike into the ocean there.
Amazing, man.
And yeah, so that one that I was touching on before there is just sort of like a general mindset, but also is really good for travel, is just attaching the value to the process more than the outcome. I know it's very easy for us in this day and age for the outcome to be sort of that holy grail at the end of the path, and it can be easy to get the blinders on and just kind of aim for this outcome. And I think goals are really important in getting to that stage, and they're also really important in keeping us on track to appreciate that process. But a lot of the time, if we don't emphasize the outcome so much, because sometimes it can be a little anticlimactic. I know we can all think of a time when we've been so excited to do something and it's finally happened, and there's an element of it didn't quite hit the spot, or now that it's over, it's a bit sad. So if we can put the value mainly on that process and reaching the outcome, or more in a travel way, the journey rather than the destination, then I feel like we can really gain so much more. And it's something I used to do a lot with training for Ironmans, is by the time I got to that start line, it was, for me, the work was done, and all of the personal gain of going through those days of training that no one would see were what made me grow and learn more about myself, more so than the cherry on top of getting to do the race at the end. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great, man. So just like preparing, getting to that point, but then at a certain point, it's almost like letting go in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just making sure you're present. I mean, I know
there's a lightness in that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the presence of mind, and it's something that all long-term travelers struggle with, is they're constantly looking towards the next thing. I think of, oh, well, I'm doing this at the moment, but my head is a few months down the line, thinking of what other aspects I can be doing, because it's just all there at the end of your fingertips. And so we need to take a step back and be present.
Yeah, that's great, man. Thinking about travel specifically, of course, what this show's built around, it's baked into travel, right? Like thinking ahead because you have logistics to plan. And so it's not something you can always ignore because at some point you have to look ahead to kind of figure some things out. Or which road am I going to take? Where am I going to, even if it's just one day ahead, and it puts you into the future because that's sort of baked into the process of having to figure out logistics. So what you're bringing up is important because I think that mindset can be really powerful to, to kind of detach you from, the logistics sucking you into sort of that other mindset that you're trying to avoid, right? Of kind of the outcome-based mindset. So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just on a small scale, I had that yesterday when I was having to apply for the paperwork for my visa for Congo, and because it had to be done. It had to be done a week ahead of schedule, and I had to remind myself, hang on, you've got one more day here with your family. Make sure you also have that time to be present with them. So,
yeah, I always like to batch my logistics sometimes. It's like, all right, today it's just going to be coffee shop for like 4 hours, going to plan the next 2 weeks. Then I'm not going to think about it. But yeah, it can be challenging. But I wasn't cycling through Africa either, All right. You could do the Forrest Gump thing and just get on your bike and go. And when you're thirsty, you stop and drink or whatever. But we all know the reality of visas and, like you just mentioned, there's things that are going to come up. All right. What's another point you brought that you wanted to share?
Some of these I want to preface with as well. They probably sound a little counterintuitive. And
we like counterintuitive.
Yeah. And they're also obviously based on experiences that I've had and mistakes I've made. So I'm going to be a hypocrite. I still make a lot of these ones as well. So I'm not perfect when it comes to it. So one of them I think is a good one for travel perspective, and that's thinking of the worst case scenario. And it's a thing that I think we're very good. We're kind of hardwired to think what can go wrong and not necessarily what can go right or be learned or be gained from an experience. And I think we can use this to our advantage because a lot of the time risks are not that scary once we take them. And if we think before we do it, okay, what is actually the worst case? A lot of the time we realize it's not that bad. And the possibilities that we might gain from it are actually really great. And I think obviously as you travel more, your risk tolerance will shift as you want to visit other parts of the world. And I've found sort of time and time again that from the sort of more quote unquote dangerous places that it's best to take advice from people who have been there and not from people who haven't, because a lot of the time people who haven't will think that it's dangerous, or they get their information from potentially outdated sources. But a lot of the time people who've been there recently, whether it be through Facebook groups or WhatsApp chats, have pretty good up-to-date information, and 9 times out of 10 those risks are not that scary once we take them. And I think that's something that I had recently. Just a few days ago, I was riding down the road deep in the jungle here in Tanzania, and the bolt holding my rear rack on just sheared off, and I was probably 60, 70 miles from anywhere that would be able to fix it. And so I had to try and find a way to fix it. And, it kept breaking, and then, I was just getting in my head and getting frustrated. And this guy came past and just waved and smiled, and it cut me out of it. And I stopped and thought to myself, what is the worst case here? The worst case is I have to wear the bag that's on the back of the bike, and I cycle, and it's a little uncomfortable, and I get to the end and it's all sorted. And it just made me sort of laugh at myself and not take it so seriously. And yeah, some of the best experiences I've had have been from places that people have said don't go to, whether it be Papua New Guinea or the north of Pakistan. It's just time and time again, those places are the ones that leave me gobsmacked at the humanity of people and the joys of life. So
that was just yesterday, huh?
Yeah. It happens. Every day out here is like a full travel week.
That can be tiring and challenging, but also part of the whole point. What are some of the things that you thought were the bad things that could happen that turned out to be something completely different than what you envisioned in your head? Can you think of anything? Yeah.
I think on the recent trip to Papua New Guinea, I was there in the highlands for the Mount Hagen festival. And, I'd been even in contact with people who, had been there, and they were saying, it's a pretty hostile environment, and, if you look like you can be robbed in Port Moresby, you will be. And I was thinking, gee, is this too much? And, so I went there with a bit of trepidation, thinking, the worst case scenario is actually may not be that great. But when I got there, and I have never, in all of the places I visited, felt more welcome and more sort of looked after and mutually respected by the people there, that it was by a factor of 10 probably the hospitality. And it just made me realize that, again, a lot of these risks are maybe not necessarily that scary once we take them.
If people are wanting to go to some of these, I don't want to say harder to reach, but maybe more, you kept sort of using air quote, like more dangerous, but of course that can mean things can happen everywhere, and some places are more unstable in different ways. So we have to just acknowledge that, right? And acknowledge that maybe you coming through single white male is different than perhaps somebody else coming through. How do you find these groups, what you mentioned, like WhatsApp groups and things, where you can kind of talk to people that have actually been there instead of, diving too deeply into the media narrative, let's say?
Yeah, I think that's a super important point to make, is that these are experiences that I've had as a single white male where you definitely do have advantages and you are treated in a more welcoming way. And that's one of the more difficult aspects of traveling to some of these places. I've found it quite difficult, for example, in Afghanistan with that as well. And I can touch on that later. But to get to your point, I think that there's some groups. There's one great group called Every Passport Stamp on Facebook. And there's probably 20 to 25,000 people in this group who all have some sort of vision to go to many, if not all, of the countries. And you can ask questions in there or look back through the posts at super detailed recent reports from whether it be guides or transport options or visa help, all these types of things. And that is probably the biggest fountain of knowledge that I use and contribute to. And it's a really wonderful community to be a part of as well.
Awesome. All right. What else do you have on your notes here you want to share?
Let's see. There is one here that is about sort of travel's capacity for teaching us, I think. And it comes from a quote from Greenlights, the autobiography by Matthew McConaughey, which has an absolutely wonderful listen, especially it's narrated by him. So if you've ever...
All right. We're gonna...
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my best McConaughey.
That was pretty bang on. It comes from a moment where he is actually traveling in Africa and witnessing a sort of fight between these two men, a verbal fight, and he chooses one of their sides, and they both turn at him and they say, no, it's not about what is right and what is wrong. It's about, do you understand? And I think that that's something that has come through time and time again in my travels is how travel will challenge all of your norms, really. It challenges your cultural norms, and it travels the way that you view the world. And I think that's one of actually the most educational aspects of travel is having your worldview challenged and being able to appreciate that and take that on board and understand what that means. And I think the great Rolf Potts also has a great quote here about cultural awareness is often the positive product of rather negative experiences. So it's not to say that all the time these experiences that happen on the road that challenge you are going to be easy to deal with. But I think as long as you're calm and aware of that and you can take that on board, there's a lot to be learnt from understanding why people have views different to yours.
What is the most radical shift for you, like pre-travel versus how you see the world now?
I think it comes down to safety and how the generosity of people. I think the sense of community that I've found from travel and from the people that I meet in parts of the world that you may think might be a little bit more hostile is something that has really opened up my eyes to how the world is generally a big, safe place where a lot of people just want similar things, and stuff will challenge you. For example, like, here, the garbage in the street, people are quite happy to potentially throw bottles just onto the street, and that's challenging, and it's something that you have to get into the mindset and maybe dig a bit deeper of, okay, why is that happening? And maybe, it's quite hard to not think I'm right, people are wrong, these types of things. But time and time again, you will have your views challenged. And I think, if you continue to only view other people's values through your eyes, then it sort of detracts from the fact that the world is rich and diverse, and that, there isn't right and wrong necessarily. It's just about understanding how other people approach things in the world.
Can be tricky, and that specific example you just shared is a great example of can be hard to understand some of these things that go on. Trash is a great one. It's a visual, very visceral thing. I mean, you just see trash everywhere. You just think, we've been to these parts of the world. It can be discouraging.
For sure, yeah, and it can be. You can really get sort of demoralized by it. And another one is sort of potentially some places treatment of animals, and animals are different in stray dogs and how people might treat them. It can be very challenging, and I think but at the end of the day, there is an educational aspect to it, and as long as you realize that, it's just a different worldview and a different approach, then you can appreciate some element of it while still not agreeing with it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You can try to dig into the cultural reasons and open yourself up for the understanding, but like you said, not necessarily having to agree with it, but having an understanding, I think,
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be something so challenging. It can just be differences in opinion or in political stance or in culture. It doesn't even have to be with locals. I mean, when you're traveling at a hostel, when you're talking to other people from other parts of the world and they have different political views. I mean, imagine if we all spoke the same language and thought the same way, it would be pretty boring. So it's great to encourage these conversations about things that, might not be what you agree with, but other people have these views, and it's great to understand why.
On that note, I partially blame the Australians for my nomadic days because, I met so many Australians on the road, and they're like, on my first trip, I'm just like, how long are you guys traveling? I'm traveling for 2 months. I'm an American thinking this is an eternity. And Australians how about you guys? 3 years, 5 years. I don't know if I'm ever going home. Just wow. That's it sounds so obvious.
We're so far away from home. You got to make the most of that flight ticket.
The Australians, in some ways that I met, some of the Australian travelers that opened my mind, blew my mind open to be whoa, this can be this doesn't just have to be a thing you do in between, until you go into the real world or whatever the case is. This can be something you just do all the time. That was a revelation, So anyway, thanks to the Aussies out there.
I'll take the credit.
All right, what else do you got?
I think one of the big travel misnomers, and you touched on it before about the difference between pre-travel and post-travel, is the things that you worry about usually before you go traveling aren't usually your biggest worries. As I said before, people are nicer, things are generally cheaper, especially if you're coming from Western countries like the States or definitely Norway. Pretty much everywhere else you're going to visit is going to be cheaper. And even if it is a place like Scandinavia, which might be on the upper end of the budget, it's still doable on a budget, whether it be through hostels or street food or camping or woofing or these types of things. There's always ways of experiencing it through a local lens, couch surfing, that still give you access to these more expensive countries. And other things that people worry about, for example, in Africa, interactions with wildlife encounters, and people assume there's a lot of violence and war and terrorism, and that's not to say there isn't pockets of this, but honestly, the most likely things are always illness and being on the road physically, the driving aspect and the exposure to disease and sickness is something that we all take as part and parcel of travel. Maybe it's because obviously we have it at home as well. You can get sick or you can drive a car at home, but realistically, those are your more likely things that you need to worry about than necessarily being involved or caught up in some sort of lion attack or being exposed to civil war. Whereas, I mean, obviously you do have to take into account some places are more volatile than others. I think it's a better way of describing the world as opposed to dangerous countries. It's more volatile, although you can visit them at one particular time and they're fine, the next day it could be a completely different story. So that's how I kind of tend to look at it. And I've found from my years traveling that I've had very few, if any, experiences that I would deem unsafe, but quite a few where illness and has really played a pretty big role and, almost brought it to an end.
Your website, Route to Travel, and you have your YouTube vlogs, and you can kind of get, if people want to get a peek into what the life is like out there on the road. I thought I saw one where an elephant charged you. Was I mistaken? Because you just mentioned the animal encounters, and then you're like, oh, you don't have to worry about that. But then, did you get charged by an elephant?
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it, except when you get charged by an elephant.
Yeah. When I did write these down, I did put in brackets, animal encounters, brackets sometimes. So that was an interesting one because, as I said, across the continent, it's pretty rare where you might encounter wildlife outside of national parks. Anyone who's been on a safari knows that suspense and anticipation of driving for half a day through supposedly these game reserves where you just see nothing and you're going, okay, well, maybe it's not so common, but there's one exception really, and that's coming through Botswana, especially at the time of year when I was there, because it's the dry season and there's very few areas of permanent water, and so animals are migrating towards these watering holes, and there's no fencing in Botswana, so you'll be driving or riding along the road through very, very open, flat grassland savanna, and there's just the whole road you can see where the elephants have just barged through the trees and they've, defecated everywhere and the road's covered, and you're thinking, okay, this is even in the middle of the day because that's when they're least active, but along the road where we're riding is kind of some pipes that run along the side, they're under the ground, but every few kilometers there's like a concrete block where it comes up out of the road to feed any villages that are nearby, and the elephants will go and crash open these concrete blocks and burst the pipes and cause like a little pool on the side of the road. And where we were riding past one of those where there was a group of 6 or 7 elephants. And generally the rule is that you want to wait for a car to come and have the car shield you as you go past. But we were in the middle of Botswana, like hundreds of kilometers from really anyone. You'd see probably 4 or 5 cars a day. So we didn't really have that luxury. And we've managed to go as far to the left as we can, but the big bull elephant had his back to us. So I think we kind of spooked him as we got close, and he must have made the call to the other elephants for them to turn and run, and he's turned at us and sort of come right up to the edge of the road. And that was a pretty scary encounter, but it was luckily most elephants are known to do false charges, so they will do that to sort of scare you away. Whereas some other animals like buffalo, which you don't want to be on the other end of a charge because they don't false charge, they'll just keep going.
Oh my gosh. So the caveat to what you just said is that you may have elephant or you may have animal encounters.
Yeah, as I said at the top, these are generalizations. There's some exceptions to every one of them. And unless you're in the 0.01% who are cycling through open Botswana, then you can probably take that as a pretty...
Yeah, but I mean, to your point, like I think some of the more common quote unquote animal encounters would be like stray dogs in some of these places. You think about something like more exotic is an elephant or a tiger jumping out, but it's more likely that you could be in, some city and you've run into a pack of stray dogs and one of them goes berserk or something,
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that because that jogged my memories. On that same day, it was a really long day. We'd done about 140 kilometers, so maybe like 85, 90 miles. And we made it through those sections of really tough, like exposure to animals and just head on a swivel all the time. And we rolled into the tiny little village and kind of let our guard down. And these 3 dogs just came sprinting over and tried to bite our ankles and our feet. And straight back into survival mode.
It's just like, really? I just relaxed.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. When you go through some of these places, I'm just curious from a logistics standpoint, how do you know if there's going to be water, or how much water to bring? What do you do when you're on an adventure like this?
Yeah, so luckily there's a lot of sections through this route that are quite plentiful, but there's definitely places that come to mind. Through Namibia was probably some of the hardest days of my life. There was...
Because you could be in real trouble if you run out of water. I mean, that's it, Food you can run out of and still be okay, but...
Absolutely. I think the closest one was I was sort of the first 3 weeks I was, had this purist mindset of I'm going to, ride 120, 130 kilometers every day and barely have rest days. And, just it's a silly mindset, like something that you rarely get to the point where when you're just cycling sunrise to sunset, you realize, why am I out here if I'm not interacting with people, if I'm not, stopping to smell the roses, I guess. So it was during this section that going through Namibia is, one of the least densely populated countries in the world. And although extremely visually stunning and beautiful, very inhospitable, there's a famous road called the D707. And anyone who's been to Namibia has probably driven it and, also echoed the point that it's the most beautiful road in Namibia, but I hadn't really thought about what that would mean to cycle it. I'd always just sort of gone ahead and thought, yep, it'll be great to cycle. And I'd built my bike with the understanding that there was a lot of different terrain that I would have to go through. And so it's pretty prepared. It has like a 4-liter water tank between the pedals, and I have like a Camelback 2 liters on my back and bottles. So I have a fairly large capacity. But even in Namibia, even when it's not so hot, you just cannot keep up with the amount of water that you're losing through sweat. So I didn't really factor in as well that this time of year it was specifically bad through September, October, but there was just prevailing headwinds for the entire time. And I think that's the one element that I wouldn't want to have. I will have rain or heat or mountains, but the headwind is the most demoralizing thing. And so there was a solid 15 to 20 days of every day being a headwind. And this day in particular that I'm talking about was one of those days. And it was on the D707, which is a sand road. And so it's difficult already and corrugated. There's one accommodation or farmhouse on the whole 200 kilometer stretch, so 120 miles or so. And it's about 10 miles off the road. And so I was aiming for this and I was doing really well. And then it got very hot and the headwind got very strong and the sand got very deep. And those are 3 of probably the worst sort of combinations. And it's the only time really on the whole trip that I've started to think, oh, okay, this is actually quite scary, because I'd seen, this was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I'd seen 2 cars that day. And the good thing in Namibia is that people will stop and they'll invariably give you water because they're thinking, what is this guy doing out here? But, once I saw that second car go past, I thought, what if that's, the last car of the day? And I was at the point where the sand was so deep that I couldn't cycle anymore. I had to push the bike. So I was pushing the bike up the hill through corrugations in sand, thinking, okay, well, I've got another 35 kilometers, say a bit more than 20 miles to get done, and I'm doing about 4 kilometers an hour. So I'm doing the maths. I'm thinking I've got this much water left and this many hours of sunlight, and then I still have to get off the main road and up to this accommodation. And it was, that was probably the moment where I thought, this is pretty silly. But luckily, whatever happened, I persevered. The wind changed slightly. The road got slightly better. I was able to push my bike until the point where the turnoff was up to the accommodation. And I thought, if I can get to there, the wind will change and I'll have it at least on my side, not in the front. And I got there and it was still very bad conditions. And luckily, the one last car of the day, the third car, came past and took the turn up to where I was going. And they gave me a lift for the 10 kilometers up to the accommodation. And that was, I got to the end and just kind of collapsed. But then the beauty of it is you wake up and do it all again the next day. Because I was only halfway down the D707.
would be the most stressful thing. Like if you're battling conditions and you're running out of water and there's nowhere to get any, that would be one of the more scary situations.
For sure, because you're thinking even if I decide to set up camp here for the night, it still doesn't guarantee that I'm out of here. It just means I wait longer for a car to come. So you have this constant internal battle of, do I go? Do I stop? Do I go? Do I stop? There was another day when the headwinds were impassable. Like I was standing like this, just head first into the wind, just not being able to move. And I did about 15 kilometers in 3 hours or something. And I thought, I can't actually go any further. I need someone to come and get me out of here because I don't have enough water to keep going. And so, yeah, it sounds kind of a little reckless in these situations, but I prepared as much as I could, and the conditions had changed that day. When I checked on windy, it was fine. And, there's just those sections in Namibia where you're looking at 200 kilometers with no food or water or towns or even places to stop and shelter. So yeah, it's an inhospitable place. It's somewhere I would absolutely recommend anyone to travel in, but cycling there is a different beast. And it probably goes on quite nicely into the next point.
All right, well then let's roll right into it.
Yeah, I think it's about doing hard things and sort of if you're not being challenged to try harder. So it's like, obviously we're talking adventure travel here. We're not talking about you can't relax, you can't go on holiday, everything has to be crazy and challenging. But I think there is a lot to be learned from doing hard things and the resilience it builds and the character that it builds and the coping mechanisms that you gain from it that you can also use in other situations. And really at the end of the day, it comes back to creating like a perspective or a relativity for the rest of your travels and the rest of your experiences in life. Because, after those hard days in Namibia, it was a breeze. I mean, I would take the headwind all day, and it was on tarmac roads. I didn't mind. There was, water everywhere. It was plentiful. And if I hadn't done that section, then I probably would have still struggled in that next bit because I didn't have that perspective shift or that new baseline, I guess, to go off. And I think, there's a lot to be learned from hard things. I think anyone can probably think of a time in their life where they've pushed themselves and it's memorable. Like, whether it be trying to climb a mountain and feeling like you can't get there and getting to the top and having learned maybe that your boundaries are slightly further down the line, and that can be addictive as well. And I think, a lot of the things that we really remember in life have come from putting ourselves to more or less of an extent through some level of hardship. And whatever that means to everyone, it doesn't have to be, some sort of objective level of hardship to where you have to run around the world. It can just be whatever that means to you, whether it be taking that first trip and being overseas solo for the first time. Now that is super challenging, and it is, everyone who's done it can tell you that they learn so much about themselves, so much about the world, and so much about what they're capable of from doing that. And yeah.
That's a great point. The last one, yeah, that it doesn't have to be objectively hard. Like you could say what you're doing. I mean, most people, except for a small percentage of people probably who have a lot of cycling experience would, perhaps like the group of people that cycled around the world could relate, but most people are going to be like, this is insane. But like you said, yeah, it's not about cycling through Africa or walking around the world or whatever. It can be about spending one night, in a tent overnight for the first time. And that's scary and that's hard. And it makes you face a lot of your own discomfort or fears. And, there's a lot of ways to do that. I think that's what the beautiful things about this point too, is you can make it's very individualistic, and anybody listening can adapt that to themselves,
Yeah, and I think I tried to kind of, as I jotted these down, make them applicable to sort of every quote unquote level of traveler. It doesn't have to be, just super extreme. It's the sort of lessons that I've learned that at different points that I feel like people can take a leaf from. And I think, I know I keep going back to where I am now, but even just yesterday we went and visited the Gombe National Park, where Dr. Jane Goodall has done all of her research with the primates since 1960, and it's an amazing opportunity to see chimpanzees up close. There's very, very few places where you can see so many chimpanzees, but there's still it's a wild place. It's up on a big hillside where you have to trek into the jungle, and I'm here with my mum and my aunt. And my aunt, she hadn't done very much physical activity for a while, and she was worried about going up to this place. And we said, we just go at whatever pace we need to, and we'll get there. And she got there, and it was really difficult. And there was many times where she said, I can't do this. I'm going to turn around. I'm sorry for slowing you down. And we just said, just whatever it takes, we'll just go slowly. And we got there to a point where, when you're tracking for animals, a lot of the time you get to a point of sort of despair where you think, okay, that's it, we're not going to see them. And that's always when it just clicks. And we came around this corner and we just saw, we were so lucky. We saw these chimpanzees sitting at a termite's nest. They pulled the branch down from the trees, took all the leaves off it, and just used it as a tool to poke the termites out of the mound and eat them. And to see my aunt, who had pushed herself through very difficult terrain, to be enjoying the fruits of that labor was really, really special to see. And I think having seen that, and then her coming down, and she said she went and looked at herself in the mirror after and said, "You just did that." And I think the power that has then in other aspects of your life to say, she was floating the next day. She was so happy with herself and what she'd done, and that just changes your perspective, and the shift in relativity is really powerful.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Great real world example. What else you got? This is a killer list, by the way, man. I'm loving this.
Now that I'm jumping around all over, I'm kind of like,
no, it's all tying in wonderfully. I think this is great.
I'll give you a couple more. I think there's a lot to be learned from the classic old adage of less is more, and this is kind of twofold. I think I find that time and time again across the world, the most generosity, the most openness, the most hospitality and warmth comes from people with the least. And there's definitely something that I can't quite put my finger on to be learned from that. But I think to be exposed to that is something that is really heartwarming and, really reminds you of the importance of connection, of the importance of appreciation and mutual respect. And, for example, I'm trying to think of times where it's happened. I mean, in Venezuela, I was coming down from the mountains and it was absolutely pouring rain, and we got to the main road and there was one 18-wheeler truck just happening to go by, and we hailed him down and we said, "Is there any way you can take us to the town?" And he put us in the back in the sort of holding area of the 18-wheeler. There was nothing in there except one box of mangoes, and he just left the back doors open so he didn't think we were being kidnapped or anything. And we just watched the world roll by. And, this was when Venezuela was going through severe economic crisis. And we got to the end and jumped out and went to pay him, and he just refused. He wouldn't take it. And we really tried to, because we knew how much it could make a difference. But it was just that hospitality from people who had so little that was really, really heartwarming. And the same goes for, street vendors in a lot of the Arab world, and specifically I'm thinking of in Kabul. I had an incredible interaction where, there's no common language, but you're going up and asking for a pomegranate juice, or whether it be a kebab, and there's just a warmth of, not allowed, refusing to be paid, and just, hand on your heart, just saying like, sort of, you are my guest. And yeah, those are the experiences that I yearn for and feel the most impacted by. But again, yeah, less is more sometimes. And I guess the other aspect to it is packing wise. I think a lot of times you should definitely pack a lot less, just to put it on a lighter note. Maybe not quite as extreme as I am on this bikepacking trip. I've got one spare shirt and one spare shorts, and that's it. But you can definitely, no matter the conditions, get a small bag, a carry-on bag to travel with, and it's liberating.
Love it. A twofold less is more. Nice. Get more bang for your buck. All right. What else do you have?
Let's see. Let's go 2 more.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for us. That'll give us 8,
Great.
I think.
All right.
By my
That's
count,
good.
Anyway. But there's a lot of lessons packed in there. But yeah,
yeah. Got to make sure they're still digestible and it's not just me rambling. So.
Not. You're doing great, man.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and also leaving some things to chance. So it's all about the flexibility in your travels. I know I'm definitely at fault with this. I love to try and find out everything there is to do in a place, and that's probably where the obsession with trying to visit every country came from, is that I now have something I want to do in every country, and it's not just to go there and tick it off, but it's to go and experience this unique thing. And I think that's now what drives me. But there's definitely a lot to be learned from being flexible and allowing things spontaneously to happen, because those are generally the ones that are the most memorable. And I think, being comfortable, being uncomfortable is something that you just have to learn to love, especially traveling through some of the harder parts of the world, because it's going to be a lot of the time. There's a lot of the time it comes back to that initial point about challenging our norms, that's uncomfortable, but also just being physically uncomfortable in a lot of small buses and long distance trains, and but these are the parts where you generally meet locals and you have those unique, more authentic interactions. Like I was in the north of Pakistan, and I met a young man on the bus heading up into the Karakoram Highway, and he spoke incredible English, and we got chatting, and we were all packed into this tiny little bus. I'd actually, to get there, had to hang on the back of one of the other buses with a sheep that was on top of the bus, just looking right at me. And so then once I got into this next bus and I got a seat, it was very easy. But we talked, and he was on his way back to a wedding in his village, and he invited me, and I went to this small Wakhi village. Wakhi is an ethnic group of people who live in the north of Pakistan. There's probably about 100,000 left living there, and I went and was invited to this wedding, and it was like one of the most touching moments of my life, of being surrounded by these huge peaks as the sun set, and being exposed to a completely different way of celebrating a wedding. And oddly enough, I just remember I ended up on the Pakistani cable network news channel. There's a guy there with a microphone that asked me to talk about it, and someone a few months later sent me a clip from the #1 cable news channel that I'd been broadcast on. So that kind of stuff. If I'd had plans and not been flexible and been open to doing that, then you wouldn't have been able to get those really unique experiences.
Yeah, you get that invitation, you gotta roll. You gotta roll to the wedding. Well, I've heard so many people say they've been invited to weddings on the road like this, and it's just like, it's pretty incredible to think. I mean, I have to imagine it's happened in the States too. Perhaps people have, but I just don't think it's as commonplace to invite a stranger traveling through to your wedding. Hey, man, just come to my wedding. I think it's so cool. I cannot imagine
that happening in Australia. No. Yeah, but I think those are probably some of the biggest crucibles of culture, is everyone coming together to celebrate something in a very customary and traditional way. It's probably one of the most real ways of seeing what that country's culture has to offer.
Cool. It's being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and leaving things to chance, being open to serendipity, that type of thing. Yeah, that's great, man. Awesome list. Was that?
So we'll tie it off with one more.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So one I like to think of as well is that we are so lucky to be out here traveling. Everyone who's listening to this podcast loves travel, and it is so lucky. But at the end of the day, you're also an ambassador for not only where you come from, but for foreign travelers in general. And I think, given that we are so lucky to go and visit these places, we can also flip it on its head and take it as an opportunity to give back a little bit to those people who are living there, who might never have the opportunity to leave and travel and visit and see other parts of the world. So sharing a little bit of your culture and customs and the way that you live and believe is a really great way for those people who are living there, who may never get to leave their country, to be exposed to the world a bit more and learn. And I think it's always a good thing to remember, is that may be the person's only exposure to people from outside. And just remember that you are an ambassador for yourself, your country, and for all travelers. So I think something that, again, going back to Papua New Guinea, I found that a lot, is that even watching, so at this festival to call it a festival, people probably think of some sort of EDM trance thing, but it's a cultural festival in the Highlands where sort of 200 tribes from all around the Highlands come together into Mount Hagen and perform their traditional song and dance. And there's probably thousands and thousands of local Papua New Guineans who visit, but maybe 40 or 50 foreign tourists. And to see all these tribes looking at each other with such awe. I mean, it's standing there in full dress, big headdresses, grass skirts, like face paint, and like jaw on the floor watching these other tribes is just such an incredible way of seeing what you think of as like maybe they all know each other and it's not that exciting for them, but that's also a way of them getting to travel and see other aspects of their own similar cultures.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Yeah, have the true cultural exchange, giving back in that way. It's really just your time, right? Giving your time, piece of your self, your perspective. I love it, man. What a bunch of travel wisdom there. That's some serious travel wisdom, some hard-earned travel wisdom. That's amazing. On the giving back thing, we should tie in the charity, because I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're doing this for. And I'm curious, having the charity tie in with your adventure and kind of like branding it for yourself, right? Like Cycling Africa, you're doing it for a charity. I feel like also there's a lot of built-in accountability there that's going to help you see it through, make it a little bit harder to give up. You don't strike me as the guy that's going to like give up, having done Ironmans and stuff like that. But I do think this framework can be helpful for anybody that wants to push their limits and wants to do something. And they, perhaps aren't sure, like, if they're going to be able to finish it out, see it through. Having some external accountability, whether it's telling people or doing it for charity or something like that. I can find that seems like that's been a theme in the show, where that really kind of helps people in those times when they're maybe a bit uncomfortable and want to kind of drop out. It's like, well, I have to keep going. I already said I'm doing this.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It really helps to have that level of accountability and know that there's other people that are benefiting from what you're doing out there, and helps to push you on. I think it's something I did with one of my Ironmans as well. I raised money for Afghan aid when the government was changing there, and it was just like whenever I was really dark and going through tough times on the course, I just reminded myself that no matter how hard this is, it sort of pales in comparison to what people are going through on a day-to-day basis with the change there. So it definitely gives you some motivation and helps you to get through. And I think it sort of ties in with what I'm doing for this trip is something that I really is dear to my heart. I mean, I studied my master's in global health, so having sort of basic access to amenities in the developing world is something that I've seen time and time again is just so critical. And what I've been using along this trip to get water is a Sawyer water filter. I'm not sure if you're aware of them. They're just like a small filter that screws onto the top of a bottle, and you can squeeze the water through it from any source really, and it removes like 99.9999% of microplastics, bacteria, protozoa, and it's incredible. I mean, to have that available to me, and it can do upwards of 400,000 liters of water through this tiny filter. And so that was something that was really important to me, was to try and give back something to do with water, because I was obviously using that same technology. And this charity that I'm raising money for, Pure Water for Africa, uses the Sawyer technology, but on a larger scale. They have these kind of bucket versions of the same technology, and they're installed across the continent at a cost, a very minimal cost. I think it's about $30 to install into. That's the donation amount to install into a village or an orphanage or a church, and this can provide water with very minimal maintenance needed for up to 10 years. And so I was just talking with one of the people who run the company a few days ago, and they'd just gotten back from installing 350 filters in Maasai villages in Kenya. So it's going on, it's out there, it's happening, and it's making a difference for people. So if anyone wants to donate, I'd be very grateful, or wants to pass on the information to anyone else. It's just great to get the word out there for all the good work that's being done.
Yes, we'll link to is the GoFundMe the best link for people to donate? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, then people can get an overview again of your trip and what this means to you, which they just heard. But I mean, go on there and check it out, and feel free to make a donation. I did want to ask you about a few of your favorite travel experiences, perhaps some that you'd recommend, a few that you might want to have in the future that are on your bucket list or whatever you want to call it. So people call it the live list, bucket list, whatever you want to call it. I think you know what I mean. Before we get to that, just really quickly curious, and I know some people might be wondering, so I'm going to ask this question, feel comfortable talking about it, how you're able to afford to travel so consistently for this length of time. Have you been like working and saving up and then you just spend all your money on travel, or kind of what's been your formula so far?
Yeah, that's definitely initially how it worked. I would work, when I finished school, I worked like 7 days a week in a bar, and I just had the idea of like, it was a big European backpacking trip that was on the cards, and I just, no matter how rough the night shift was in the club, I was like, man, in 4, 5, 6 months, I'm going to be jet setting on a train through, Norway or something. And that's just what kept me going. And then once I had that sort of understanding and thirst for travel, it just was enough of a motivator to keep me to work each time I came back home. Each time I would still work while I was studying, and then in each of the breaks between semesters, I would head off, whether it be for 3 weeks to Sri Lanka and India, or it could have been to Southeast Asia, or a trip to Vanuatu or something like that, something close by between the semesters. And then in the big break, I fit in some trips. I also had taken some semesters off from study to travel. I did a big sort of 5 or 6 months in South America, which actually started in Africa because I had a job set up in Botswana at the university doing research assistant role. So I've tried to tie it in a bit. I lived in Tanzania doing some volunteer work as well there for a few months in the hospital. As I've tried to sort of make travel life revolve around work, and now it's sort of transitioning to more of how do I do the opposite and have travel be the central part of my life. And I think, as you said, being able to afford it was mainly just through saving. I really spend no money when I'm at home. I cook. I mainly just hang out with my friends and don't really have many things at home. Once I bought a van and I lived in it, and it was really cheap, and I was able to go and work at the ski season and live for free in my van. So just like little things like that. And then when I travel really cheaply. So, for example, a 6-month trip might cost me, I could get by on easily, maybe $1,000 a month, or maybe 1,500 max. And that means that given that Australia has quite a high minimum wage, and I didn't spend much when I was at home, I was able to save pretty well. And I mean, again, when I worked for the government in the last few years in the health department. And so that was a really good way to save money. And also we had a good work-life balance where I was able to get a fair bit of holiday and take some leave without pay and fit that in around my work obligations. But yeah, now as I transition more towards a life of location independence, I'm also starting up a small group travel company to visit some of these less visited places. And there's a lot of really, really cool and interesting trips that I've got lined up that are on the cards that I can't say too much about yet. But if anyone wants to get involved and come and visit some of these destinations with me, I'm looking at places in Central America, Central Asia, West Africa, the Middle East, even Antarctica. So yeah, I'll if anyone wants to keep up with that, hit me up on any of the socials on Route to Travel. It's Route to Travel on everything. And yeah, that's just the way I've been able to keep it my priority my whole life, I guess. Once you taste it and how good it is, it just becomes a priority.
It's delicious. No, I think that, I'm glad you brought up the priority thing, because that was something I was just going to say is going back to what you said right at the beginning, you've just been prioritizing travel. And that really is, I think, the secret. Whatever age you are, whatever style of travel, or whatever your monthly budget's going to be and all of that, if it's the priority, you'll find a way to do the travel things you want to do ultimately. I think, generally, at least people listening to this show, I think have the opportunity to do that. So
yeah, and I think time and time again, it is cheaper to travel in a lot of these parts of the world than to live in the West. And it's just a question of being able to have the capital either coming in passively or to build it up over the months preceding the travel. So yeah, it's doable, everyone.
What are a few of the, they don't have to necessarily be experiences, but, those destinations that you'd love to go back to or that you'd recommend that are, perhaps more accessible to the average traveler? I know you're planning on taking people to some of the harder to get to places. I mean, you could throw one of those in too if you feel obviously strongly about it. But yeah, just wanted to hear a few. We always love some good off the beaten path type destination recommendations, whether that's based around an experience or just a place to go spend some quality time. Yeah, what do you think? Definitely.
Yeah. I'll start with one that's up in your neck of the woods, Jason. There's I'm wondering if you've ever been as well. It's I'm going to absolutely butcher the Norwegian, so you can correct me. But it's called Slinningsbalet. It's the midsummer bonfire in Ålesund in Norway. And every year around the midsummer, they build the world's biggest bonfire. It's made of like wooden pallets. It's out on this little artificial island and in this absolutely picturesque area. And people just go and sit on the hill, and someone climbs to the top and lights the fire, and you just watch for about 5 hours as it slowly burns, and at one point it'll eventually all teeter into the water. So that's a pretty cool, accessible experience for anyone traveling in Europe that is pretty unique and a very long-standing tradition. Ålesund's a beautiful city too. Great area to check out. Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. Another one, maybe there's a lot to do in Bolivia. I think Bolivia is one of the most underrated countries in South America, if not the world. It's action-packed. It's what everyone thinks of when they think of sort of traditional South American Amerindian culture, with the bowler hats and the colourful dresses and the old women sitting in the streets, and it's very extreme. I mean, the altitude up there is difficult, but there's some great. There's obviously the salt pans there, Salar de Uyuni, which are like this massive mirror in the wet season, and then a really dry salt pan in the dry season. The one I'm thinking of in particular, though, is the Death Road in Bolivia, which sounds a lot scarier than it is, but it's an opportunity to ride your mountain bike down from about 4,900 meters to 1,300 meters. So it just goes down and down and down, and you start up in these snow-capped mountains, and you end in this sort of lush river greenery at the bottom, and it goes down what used to be one of the world's most dangerous roads, but it's now sort of, there's no cars on that, but there's still a pretty big drop on the side, and you still get a pretty big rush from heading on down there. What about you? What is an experience that you are dying to have that you haven't, what's on the top of the list for you? What's on the top of the list? Well, what's coming up quite soon is I have a trip to Iraq and Iran at the end of in February, and I'm really looking forward to. I've had flights booked to both of them before and not been able to make it. You're not taking a break after this? Just going right to the next? Believe it or not, going straight in. Wow. Yeah, I think I should probably have a bit of a break, but yeah, this will be my break, heading to Iraq and Iran. So I would say, as far as experiential travel, I would love to go and potentially buy horses in Mongolia and ride across Mongolia on horseback. That's been something I feel like is one of the sort of last wild frontiers, is crossing the Mongolian steppe on horseback. So that's something I'd really love to get done. Amazing. All right. Thank you for everything you shared today, for taking the time to put all this together. And I know it wasn't just something you jot down. You had to kind of think this thing through and, take a wealth of travel experience and, kind of process that all and distill it down into these lessons you shared today. And so, man, I really appreciate that. Stay safe out there. Wishing you the best of luck on the rest of your journey. Please stay in touch. And thanks for being a member of this community for so long, man, and for taking the time to come on and give back. I really, really, truly appreciate it. Thank you so much again, Jason. It's been unreal chatting to you. And yeah, again, thank you for all the hard work you do and for getting the content out so regularly and keeping me company on those long rides by myself out here. It's it can be my pleasure. Lonely. Maybe I can I'd rather get an actual bike and just ride next to you for a little while. But let's make it happen. We'll have to do that another time. Thanks, Alex. Awesome, Jason. All the best to you. Cheers.
There you have it. Thank you to Alex Hennock for stopping by the show. What an inspiration. I will share my one big takeaway in a moment, along with a hilarious quote to wrap this up. First, part 2 of our special road trip planning series right now. Welcome to another edition of our special mini-series, the 5 best road trips in the USA. Each week, I'm going to help you discover a new unforgettable road trip in the region of the United States, a breakdown of why it's worth doing, a suggested itinerary, and a sampling of the variety of things you can see, do, and eat along the way. In the last segment, we cruised north to discover the hidden gems of the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. This week, we're headed south. We're going to explore an extended version of a well-known drive packed with stupendous views, goosebump-inducing music experiences, essential history, a, quote, tourist trap area to embrace, and we're going to end in a place with culinary delights you won't find anywhere else. I think I might have bit off more than I can chew with this one. I get carried away sharing some of the incredible things you can do on a trip like this, but in the famous words of Australian motor racing driver Peter Brock, he once said, "Bite off more than you can chew, and then chew like hell." That's what we're going to do today. Before we dive in, a quick question. What makes every trip you take unique and unlike anyone else's, even though you might be visiting the same place? Well, it's your willingness to dive into a destination and explore it your way that creates your on-the-ground experience, your willingness to travel, to get out of your comfort zone and embrace all of the uncertainties that come with that, serves as an excellent reminder to yourself that you are capable of great things and able to embrace the impossible. You are an icon of adventure. I want to say a massive thank you to another icon of adventure, Defender, for supporting this special mini-series. Defender, it's truly the ultimate road trip vehicle for many reasons, including its legendary durability, both off-road and on, its cargo capacity, and the fact that it's tested to the extreme. Defender's family of vehicles includes the 90, 110, or the 130, which has 8 seats with a tough, rigid body design. It's been reimagined for a new generation of explorers. That is you. You can actually design your Defender at LandRoverUSA.com. Thank you to them for supporting this special mini-series. Okay, get ready. We're headed first to Virginia. We're going to go through a gorgeous part of the Appalachian Mountains and all the way to New Orleans. And no, I'm not sending you to Bourbon Street. Well, maybe quickly, but you'll hear about that a little later on. First stop, milepost 0 of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Have you heard about the Blue Ridge Parkway? Perhaps you've been on it. This legendary 469-mile scenic drive connects the Shenandoah National Park near Waynesboro, Virginia, with Great Smoky Mountains National Park near Cherokee, North Carolina. The National Park Service calls it, quote, America's favorite drive. And perhaps that is a fitting description for a couple reasons. First, its proximity to populous points along the East Coast makes it relatively easy to access. And number 2, because of its sheer beauty, both rural and urban, along the drive you'll have access to a plethora of outdoor activities, including over 369 miles of hiking trails, over 100 miles of protected streams, 13 lakes for fishing, 14 picnic areas along the route. I mean, who doesn't love to pack a lunch and have a picnic amidst gorgeous scenery? Along the way, you'll also witness stunning backdrops featuring Appalachian mountain views, both near and far, along with pastoral landscapes. If you find yourself along the way craving urban delights, you can pit stop in places like Asheville and Boone, North Carolina. Boone was a particular hidden gem for me when I stumbled upon that town many years ago. And Roanoke, Virginia. And yes, you should stop at the Blue Ridge Music Center at milepost 213 to immerse yourself in traditional bluegrass music from the region and history. You should stop, if you can, at milepost 364.1 to visit the craggy Pinnacle Trail near Asheville. You can hike a short 1.2 mile round trip trail through rhododendron thicket to bask in the dramatic views of a morning sunrise with mountain mist, or perhaps witness an epic sunset. Yes, you can stop at the Folk Art Center to discover Appalachian arts and crafts, but having driven and hiked along parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway myself, I can tell you it almost doesn't matter where you stop, because one of the best parts of the drive is just that special feeling of being in Appalachian mountain country, letting, for example, the morning mist fill up your soul. It's a special area of the U.S. You really can't go wrong, no matter where you stop or what you do. And if you do love outdoor activities and you've got your Defender, the cargo capacity is insanely awesome. So you'll have plenty of space to bring with you all of your outdoor gear and much more. Okay. Second stop, let's use the end of the Blue Ridge Parkway as our jumping off point to your next adventure. Here's something different. Let's avoid hidden gems. What? Avoid hidden gems? We're going to go right to the, quote, tourist trap. Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and nearby Pigeon Forge. Now, you might get surprised with how much fun can be had in these areas. I find that even though, for example, Gatlinburg has a population of around 4,000 people and millions, literally millions of people visit this town, it is packed with all of the, you want to call them cheesy tourist attractions you could think of, right? But I find that there are two keys to having fun in tourist meccas like this. And I think they can be a blast. I mean, yes, it can be annoying with perhaps long lines, waiting for food and things like that, depending on when you go. But the two keys for me are, number one, just embracing being a tourist for a day, 2 days, 3 days, however long you're there. Just revel in it. Like, become one with the tourist masses. Embrace it. Put on your fanny pack. Enjoy the ride. Shop for the kitschy souvenirs, the bad t-shirts if you feel so inclined. Just enjoy it. And number two, every tourist town still has its locals and still has its hidden gems. And I always take that as a challenge to find them. It's a fun way to try to get under the belly of a place like that where they're so used to tourists. Like, is there a way that you can engage in a conversation with a local that gets you in to that local scene in some way? It's always a fun challenge. Anyway, Gatlinburg is the gateway to Smoky Mountain National Park with plenty of tourist attractions, as I mentioned. Pigeon Forge, famously home to Dollywood, Dolly Parton's theme park, which is regularly rated one of America's best. And side note, a bucket list item for my daughter, who's a huge Dolly fan. And between the two, there are loads of live shows. I mean, you have approximately 15 plus dedicated theater venues, over 30 different shows running during peak season, plenty of live entertainment, plenty of tourist attractions. I think you'll enjoy it if you embrace that tourist mentality. Okay, we're heading on down the road. Third stop. You have the option to pit stop in Atlanta, or you can take another route. Either way, we're headed to Montgomery, Alabama, to learn more about America's history of racial discrimination, civil rights history that must never be forgotten, by visiting the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a memorial the New York Times said is, quote, may be the most emotionally impactful cultural experience in the country, end quote. Here's a quick overview of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice from their website. And when I heard about it, when it opened in 2018, this is a place I really want to visit, and I think it's a very important stop on this trip. So here's what they said in their website. This is, quote, the nation's first comprehensive memorial dedicated to the legacy of Black Americans who were enslaved, terrorized by lynching, humiliated by racial segregation, and presumed guilty and dangerous. More than 4,400 Black people killed in racial terror lynchings between 1877 and 1950 are remembered here. Their names are engraved on more than 800 Corten steel monuments, one for each county where a racial terror lynching took place, that form the main structure of the memorial at the heart of this 6-acre site, end quote. And so much more. I encourage you to check out their website if you want to see what you can experience there. National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a difficult but profound and essential stop on this trip. Now, lastly, we're headed down to New Orleans. There's no town like it in the U.S. It's a delicious gumbo of cultures where French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean influences blend to create a vibe and a culture and a culinary delights unlike anything else in the U.S. or the world for that matter. It's entirely unique, and I've visited many times. I can tell you at one point I spent a month there working a promotion during the Mardi Gras time, And that meant, yes, we were down on Bourbon Street with all of the madness, but I also got to be a part of some of the local community parades way outside of the city and on the outskirts and in some of the different neighborhoods. I got to explore a lot of different aspects of New Orleans. And what I found outside of the Bourbon Street madness was just incredibly warm, kind people, pride, community, outstanding music around any corner. I mean, you never know what you're going to find. Unbelievably delicious food was ubiquitous. You're going to check out Bourbon Street, of course. But once you get that out of your system, may I suggest just wandering around the French Quarter and just seeing what you find. Or you could leave the quarter, visit Frenchman Street for live music and other smaller neighborhoods like Treme to experience some of that traditional Creole-influenced soul food in spots like Dookie's Chase Restaurant. This is a historic institution opened in 1941, run by the same family for generations, featuring, of course, famous dishes like green gumbo and red beans and rice. You got Willie Mae's Scotch House. It's a James Beard Award winner, opened in 1957, famous for its wet battered fried chicken. I could go on and on. We could do an entire podcast on the things to see and do in New Orleans. It's a special place you need to go and experience for yourself. And I'm telling you, if you just get out and wander around, yes, get the beignets at Café Du Monde. Yes, go see a show at Preservation Jazz Hall. Do all these things, but then get outside of that and experience the real heart and soul of New Orleans and some of the other parts of the French Quarter and on the other neighborhoods around. It's just an endless exploration, endless music, gorgeous nature, fascinating cities, endless opportunities for creating new travel experiences, new memories. Woo! What a trip. I want to thank our friends at Defender who love a great road trip. They have been supporting this special 5 best road trips in the USA mini-series, all geared to helping you discover your next great adventure. Check out the ultimate road trip vehicle, the Defender. Defender's family of vehicles includes the 90, 110, or 130. This icon of adventure with a tough, rigid body design has been reimagined for a new generation of explorers. That is you. Design your Defender at LandRoverUSA.com. Tune in next week for another epic road trip. I'll see you then. There you go. Hope you enjoyed that road trip down south. Maybe I'll see you out there on the road somewhere along that route. I'd love to get back out on that one. Okay. My big takeaway from this conversation. It's that, quote, normal people do big adventures. That means you and I can do it too, right? Before the trip, we take small steps. It might be saving $1 at a time, booking one flight or train ride or bus at a time, making one decision at a time, which supports your travels. On the road, it might be one bicycle pedal stroke at a time, one step at a time, one country at a time, one day at a time, and so on. So I just want to give a shout out to you, to anybody out there who has done their own version of a big adventure, because this is different for all of us, right? It can be taking your first solo trip, week-long road trip, anything that puts you on the road and perhaps a bit out of your comfort zone. And you took all the small steps to make that happen, whatever is flashing in your brain right now. Which means that maybe, just maybe, that, quote, crazy idea you have coming out of this episode isn't so crazy after all. It's actually within your reach. So instead of dismissing it today, let's pay attention to it. Take your dreams seriously and they'll take you seriously. And then you can tackle that dream, travel or otherwise, the same way you would if you had to eat an elephant. One bite at a time, as they say. Speaking of elephants, since Alex mentioned his story of his elephant encounter, I wanted to close with this quote from Bill Murray, who said, quote, "They say an elephant never forgets. What they don't tell you is you never forget an elephant." Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to stay in touch. Sign up for our newsletter, zerototravel.com/newsletter. Drop me a line. Would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.